Hi, I'm Rick Lambert, and welcome to today's Smarketing Show. We got a great guest, Shauna Rae, coming up to talk all about podcasts. Look, if you're on email or whatever you're doing, get on here. This is going to help you right away. And I have to answer a question, Cheryl, we've got coming in week after week from our guests. Is Cheryl's background a virtual background, or is she really that neat? And I need to tell you folks, she's actually that neat, just so you know.
Just now, in that area, though.
Yeah. Shauna Rae, so great to have you today. You know, I followed you, whether it's your writing in, some of the business literature. You're a co-host of Kitchen Confessionals, which is an awesome podcast that I think you and Leah Hunt do a great job talking about, things that are going on in your lives with great transparency and authenticity, which I think makes a great podcast. So, as we get into today's topic, let me ask you, how did you get into podcasting and what you're doing right now?
So I worked in the media in radio for a decade, and I loved it so much. The last thing I did was I hosted a radio call-in talk show. And many years passed. I got into communications, media, contracts, different things. And I still missed that connection that you can have in audio and with an audience. I thought about doing a podcast for several years, and I just, never made the time to do it. Never found the right person. And I actually interviewed Leah for Business London magazine for the column that I write. And she was so fun. And she actually reached out to me and said, how can I do more media? And I said, do you want to do a podcast? And she said, yeah. And so we figured out how to start a podcast during a pandemic. And I actually, and I'll be completely honest, enlisted the help of my 14-year-old nephew who lives in the UK, a few Zoom meetings. He helped me do the audio portion of it. So the production and the setting me up, and we're away to the races. We've been doing it for about a year now. And we have, through trial and error, I think we've gotten better, definitely, and we're growing an audience. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I'm so excited to have you on, Shauna, and I'm so excited to be talking about podcasts because Rick and I have kind of moved the Smarketing Show into a podcast, but also I'm a big fan. It's what I listen to when I run, when I sit out back on my downtime. You and I went to school together. We're both from the Ottawa and surrounding area, so it's kind of nice to sort of reconnect. We work together in the media, and here we are again talking today on the Smarketing Show. What do you think or what have you seen are some of the biggest mistakes that businesses or even just producers and co-hosts are making when it comes to podcasts?
I think it's really important. Audio is a really fascinating, awesome medium. I think it's really important to have good audio. And the only reason I say that is because it's distracting if you have laundry in the dryer, for instance. And I'm only saying this from experience. If there's something happening in the background or you're cutting in and out, it's really distracting. And so I would say that that's one thing that you hear when you hear a bad podcast, it really sticks out. Another thing, though, is people think that they're going to grow an audience really quickly. They think that even though they already have a community, that community is going to translate immediately onto a podcast and listenership and, great analytics. Not necessarily the case. It takes time. So the Joe Rogan Experience, it's one of the most famous podcasts, 10 years old. It's been over 10 years since he started that. Now, he sold the rights, the broadcast rights to Spotify for $100 million, but it took him 10 years to build that audience. So I think people need to think about, it's going to take the long game, definitely the long game. And don't be afraid to try. Like myself, a lot of people want to do it. They think about it and they think, oh, I can't do it. I've never done audio. I've never done, I'm terrible technical, that kind of stuff. With the pandemic, so much has come along in the way of technology and YouTube videos, right? You can learn almost anything on a YouTube video. That's what helped me. So don't be afraid to start. I guess that's the big thing is, don't be so intimidated. It's so fun. Honestly, when you get going, you'll love it.
Shauna, you and Cheryl come from a media background, which I think makes you skilled and trained storytellers. that I think is an untapped talent that they should teach young people, because I think it's whatever the media form is, video, text, whatever, podcasts. My question for you is, my understanding, sorry, is that there's one thing that will stop you from doing a podcast, and that's apparently a Boston Bruins game. So now, look, I'm a Leaf fan, just so you know. So Cheryl, there are some boundaries. Now, Shauna, if you were to make a suggestion, her husband's a Boston Bruins fan, by the way, we won't hold that against her. Shauna, if you were to suggest, because, I've talked to buddies of mine, they said, hey, Rick, we watch your videos on LinkedIn or this and that, and why don't you start a podcast? And for me, I was late to the game. I didn't think people listened. And then I started listening. I thought, geez, now, if you were to make a suggestion based on your experience, what you've done in the past, where you're at now with yourself and what you and Lee are doing, what would you suggest as best practices?
So I would suggest three things. One of them is what the two of you have done. Listen to podcasts. Listen to podcasts, as many as you can, ones that look interesting, ones that you don't like. Figure out which ones you want to emulate and which ones you know that you don't want to be part of. And look at also who's going to be your competition. Google a name that you're thinking of to see if somebody already has a podcast by that name, because it's really tough then to get a URL and a website put together if somebody else already has it. I would also say that know why you're doing it. So are you doing it to educate people? Are you doing it to build your personal or your business brand? Are you doing it to position yourself as some sort of industry expert? Or are you just doing it for fun so that you can get free swag to review? I mean, it doesn't matter what your why is, but know what that is going in. But also know what kind of format you want to do. So think about whether you want to interview people, just one-on-one, you and another person. Do you want to just banter back and forth with somebody, discuss things? That's what we do. Do you want to have a panel discussion? Do you want to do a series, where there's a clear beginning and end? Think about anything that you want to do, but just have a plan in your mind of, and it takes listening to podcasts to figure out exactly what's going to work for you. And the last thing I would say is kind of what I started with a don't, is invest in the best equipment that you can afford. So, do your research. There's lots of recommendations out there for good equipment. Locally, I mean, it used to be called the PA Shop. Now it's called, I think, the Music City. And they provide Fanshawe students with their stuff. But you can go to Amazon. There's like a podcast starter kit that you can get. So, just get the best equipment that you can at the time, right? Whatever you can afford, I would say. And then you can upgrade. If you really enjoy it and you want to grow your audience, then invest in later on. Once you're and be consistent. One more thing is try to be consistent. Try to do it at the same time every day. You guys do your show, quite consistently. Try to be consistent. That's a big thing. Then people can tune in. That's how you grow an audience.
Yeah, that's really good advice. One of my favorite podcasts that I've been listening to for years, and you might know this one, Shauna, is Big Sugars with Cheryl Strayed.
Yes.
One of the best. And very consistent, and just, they have great stories to tell. I also think one of my biggest pet peeves, having, listened to a lot of podcasts, are people that take so long to get into and get to the point of what they're talking about. And they've lost me. Like, I give them about 4 minutes. And if I don't feel engaged in the content after 4 minutes, I'm out.
That is a newsy thing though. We come from a news background, right? And it's like, get to the point. I'm the same.
Or at least give me some idea of what I'm going to learn, right? And then, and the length that people always say, how long should a podcast be? And I want to ask you that question, because I don't know. I'm sort of torn. Sometimes I'm good with, 6 minutes, but then other times I think, no, I've got a half an hour drive. I don't want a 6-minute podcast. I want a half an hour podcast. What are your suggestions on that?
So I've watched and sat in on a lot of webinars about podcasting. And what I can say is between 20 and 45 minutes is the sweet spot. A lot about podcasting is about engagement. A big stat that stuck out for me in one of the webinars that I attended was 97% of people that start a podcast finish a podcast. So if you have between 20 and 45 minutes, if you think that's a workout, that is, a lunch hour, it is when people have the time to listen. But that being said, if you are somebody who can do long form documentaries, there is also a market for that, right? But if you're going to do a series that you want to grow an audience, I would say 25 to 45 minutes, 20 to 45 minutes. Yeah. Sweet spot.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good to know. We're always asking that question.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
I think you're right. Like, I'll be honest, I wasn't a podcast guy in the past. I was more of a book reader, make notes, watch a video in background. And I was riding my bicycle one day, and a buddy of mine who's a sales rep, who I trained in a previous position, said, "Hey, Ricky, why don't you start a podcast?" And then as I started to look at them, I mean, here's some things that I like anyway. I like when there's a professional introduction to the podcast. In other words, it's a third party voice with a bed of music that goes, "Hey, today you're going to hear from Shauna Rae, talk about, and you don't have to go monster truck like my typical style, but I think that adds a little bump of professionalism. And you may say, hey, I can't do that. But I think to your point, Shauna, if you look around, you can find people that can prepare that. And once you've got it once, you could do an intro, outro. Consistency, couldn't agree more. Like so many people start. And for our customers, you may say, hey, that's great, but Rick, I don't have a media background. And I would suggest, like, don't underestimate what Shauna's suggesting here, because if you start under the guise of questions that your customers may be asking, yep, and maybe you pull in, as Cheryl or you said, Shauna, some guests, and those would be, by the way, employees or people on your team, to just talk about that question. Over time, that content, the Joe Rogan story, 10 years, is just going to be a brick after brick after brick in that wall you're building. And so I think, a question, why do you guys do it this way? Why is that so popular? What's the biggest, question? All those you come up with. And the last thing, Bob Smith, I have to give him credit, is, he taught me a long time ago that he was a TV anchor. He said, Rick, when you're on camera or you're talking through some medium, talk to one person. Don't talk to, hey, you guys watching, or you ladies watching or listening, you people I'm talking to you, one person. I just remember that it rung my bell, as if there's one person behind the camera. And I just think it's something that the layman doesn't know, that you folks in media would understand.
Yeah, absolutely true. So true. And they teach us that, right? They taught us that in broadcast journalism school at Fanshawe, or, wherever, is, speak to your listener, speak to your key person, right? Like, who is your target audience? Who do you want to reach?
Yeah. Last question, Shauna, before we wrap up. I guess the current landscape, which is very, it's not predictable. We didn't expect to be here, but generally the trend has been that people have started watching less TV. People aren't really reading newspapers. And I'd say there's a huge decline on print and digital. Movie ticket sales are going down. All of these things are changing, but what we are seeing is that podcasts are becoming more popular. Businesses are starting to add them into their marketing mix, at least within our agency. Why do you think that is?
It's pretty simple. You mentioned it. Both of you mentioned it. So what medium can you multitask while you're consuming, right? So you can do a workout. You can ride your bike, Rick. You can do housework. You can drive and listen to a podcast. You can't do that with a YouTube video. You can't do that with anything else. You can't do that with a newspaper. You can listen while doing other things. So then your target audience is busy people, right? And so aren't those the people that you want to reach? Aren't those the, advertisers or businesses? They want to reach those folks as clients. And, a lot of people think that podcasting is saturated, that you're going to be late to the game. Absolutely not. I pulled some stats. There's 2 billion monthly YouTube users, active users right now. 600 million blogs. In Canada, there's 800,000 podcasts, 2 million worldwide. really small compared to those other numbers. And it's growing. And 8 million Canadians, 27%, 18 plus, so over the age of 18, listen to a podcast once a month. 27% of Canadians. That's a pretty large audience. And what I mentioned, 97% of them finish a podcast. That's why people are advertising on podcasts, is because that's right. Because if you put an ad in the middle, people will listen, right? Not so much at the end, but if you put it in the middle and a break, or you put it at the start, or you put it on, the advertising material or the digital marketing that you do with your podcast, golden. That's why advertisers are getting into advertising on podcasting.
Yeah, advertising on podcasting is a whole other conversation, but thank you, Shauna, for coming on today. For more information, I really encourage everyone to check out your website, which is shaunarae.com, SHAUNARAE.com, or contact at shaunarae.com. I know people spell my name wrong all the time. So
thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was great to see your beautiful smiling face again. And as I said, we're going to have you back on for sure. And I'll be checking out your podcast on a regular basis for sure.
Awesome. We love that.
If you're a business person, listen, and I think your final statements there were so meaningful. Number one, it's the only medium that you can multitask, okay, and catch that target audience. And number two, if you think you're late to the game, candidly, with all due respect, we're saying you're wrong. You can get in right now and start to own that share of your marketplace. So, hey, Shauna, just on a personal note, congrats on all you've accomplished, and keep doing the great things you are for the groups that you work with, be they nonprofit, et cetera, here in our city and surrounding London, Ontario. If you're thinking of starting a podcast, you know who to contact now. That's Shauna Rae.
We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thank you so much.